that foam stuff that was in the back of the rockers? Well,
What is that device?
sandblaster.
Wow, cool. How far are you going here?
No, I'm debating it right now because that expanded foam that was back there is in here too. So I may end up just cutting this out, welding that in, but before I weld it in, cavity wax throughout the channel, because obviously if you put cavity wax in, you're displacing oxygen and rust can't continue.
I saw that on one of your YouTubes.
Oh, there you go. But anyway, so I'm thinking about doing that, and because I have space between here and the middle rocker, I can feed the same one that way. So I don't want to dive into it because I know down this way it's all fine, but I don't know where the expanded foam ends, and that could be just a big old can of worms that really takes us backwards. But I don't want to be delusional thinking that everything's okay at the same time.
Right. Why do people do that to begin with?
Your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. Maybe they plan on making the thing buoyant. Anyway, so I'm looking at that. The one in the front's not that bad, but it also has the same level of damage. So I will contemplate what I'm doing. Oh yeah, that ghetto thing's got to go.
Okay.
One of those solid state fuel pumps, yeah, what do they last? Maybe 6-7 months before they all burn up. With their inconsistent fuel pressures. Yeah, but that's interesting you even identify that because I got a swirl pot, a pickup pump, and a Spica pump. It's all going to go in the trunk, just like they did on the Spica GTAs. Okay, so I have all that going in the trunk. It's arguable whether the swirl pot's necessary or not. But the thing of it is though some say you can't outpace the Spica fuel pump to the Spica pump, I'm of the mind that when you got true 45 throttle bodies and you have bigger valves and everything else, which is outside the original design, that I do see that you could consume far more fuel than the fuel pump can keep up with. So I'm putting the swirl pot and everything in. That way there is a constant, continuous feed, regardless of what that fuel pump's doing.
Using the stock fuel tank?
No, actually what we're doing is Tony is making us a large capacity tank. You know, the old GTA long range tanks.
Does that go in the tire well?
Yeah, no, it goes right where the other one is. It's just it's a taller tank.
Oh, I see.
You know, but we'll have some return lines going into it, so that way when it comes back from the Spica to the swirl pot, then cools down, then it'll go into the fuel tank. So, you know.
The swirl pot cools it?
Well, when it comes back, it slows it down, which gives it the opportunity for the heated fuel, which expands, gives it the opportunity to slow down because it's coming in blend with fuel that's coming from the tank that is already cooled.
Because I've boiled the fuel in that. Which drove me crazy. I couldn't figure out what the fuck I was doing, but it was the exhaust. Running by here, well, you've already got. I would come into the pits and my fuel would be boiling.
Boiling, yeah, because you're coming in contact with the exhaust.
No, I think it's just because I was taking a lot more out of it than was normal.
Well, but see, that's the whole latent heat of fuel. I mean, the thermal expansion of it is kind of hard to calculate for, but. Which brings me back to the whole idea of the swirl pot. I'm not so much worried about cavitating on the Spica injector, but I am worried about that if you're full throttle with this much bigger head and much bigger valves and all that other stuff, that you're going to have that action where the fuel cannot possibly deliver, and it could potentially put the line in a vacuum. You know, because you're pulling more fuel than what that pump is delivering, therefore the line itself could be in a vacuum. So again, the idea is having that swirl pot, you know, along with the pickup pump, which is just basically a diesel fuel pump. So pickup pump, keeping essentially keeping the swirl pot somewhat pressurized to a degree, but not really. But giving that constant full delivery to the fuel pump itself will work less, so it should be able to drive. The only other thing I'm going to do that's not in here yet is I'm upsizing the fuel line. You know, granted the whole argument of fuel pressure versus fuel volume. But if I have more volume in the line, because the line size is larger, I shouldn't have a cavitational problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably a little overkill, but you know, I want to map it out anyway because I don't want to be in a situation like in your Southern California. It's 100 degrees outside, the radiant heat underneath the car is high. That heat on the line creates resistance, and all of a sudden you're cavitating on this because with the head being developed like it is, the worst thing you can do is lean it out because you're gonna blow that thing in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Well, mine had a big head, had a super pump, and it doesn't surprise me that and then I'm, you know, hurting the motor. But I ended up putting a blanket on it and it stopped it.
Okay. Right.
How are you going to do your exhaust?
Well, I have the MagnaFlow from Centerline, that stainless one. The only thing I'm going to do is put a heat shield right next to the gas tank. And the only reason, again, I'm doing that because this is going to be a far more active gas tank than a regular gas tank. You know, with all that fuel going around there. Plus, I got to put it in a vent somewhere that vents to the outside because I don't want the fuel tank to be venting from the return line and the trunk's running in a vacuum just simply by aerodynamics purposes. And all of a sudden, you're smelling it in here.
Yeah.
So a simple charcoal filter from a mid-70s GTV, you know, simple charcoal filter going to a vent outside, and it'll be fine. It's all that little stuff that adds up to the bigger problem, right? You know, so I'm trying to think my way through as much as possible.
What kind of fuel pump are you going to use?
It's a speaker pump delivering to the speaker system, but I have a faucet diesel pickup pump to pull it from the tank over to the swirl pod. Because speaking of pumps, as badass as they are, they're not very good at pulling. They're only good at pushing. You know, so that way I want to take that additional stress off.
That's why, well, probably overkill, but that's why I did what I did over there.
Yeah, you got a lot of alchemy going on over there.
It still only puts 20 pounds out.
Yeah?
Yeah, but it's gallons all day long.
Yeah. And so again, I'm gonna switch over probably to a 3/8 ID. 3/8 ID fuel line, which I'm gonna use copper. And there's arguments whether copper goes through a hardening process with fuel. And I argue back that that's ridiculous because you look at every one of these cars that are from the 50s and whatnot, they're still on copper lines.
Yeah.
You know, and they're
Why
not
would anybody
leaking or
say
hardening. It was a discussion that was had with one of our local engine geniuses. I'm going, I don't think that's plausible.
Is this metallurgy he's talking about?
Yeah. Okay, this is cavity wax. Then this wand, you rotate it, and it sprays a band of material throughout. Alright, so that's the end of the rocker repairs we've got going on. So now we're going to put a little bit of acid etching primer over this exposed metal. And then we'll put a little bit of all metal on top of that. And that is it for that. Now it's time to go on to start adjusting these doors. All the windows are out, everything's getting ready to be prepared to start sanding on. But before you get into any of that, you need to make sure all the doors are aligned now. Because when you're sanding, you're doing what's called an off transition sanding. Sanding from this panel to this panel, you want this to be uniform in between. If the scratch angles on this are different than the scratch angle on this, sometimes it shows up in the color. So now it's time to start aligning doors. Okay, so if you watch any of our videos, you're very aware of some of the process. When it comes to aligning doors, the GTVs, the Spiders, the Supers, they all seem to have one thing in common. They have a multi-dimensional adjustment series to them. The TI, as in the case of the 65, doesn't have that. In fact, your adjustments are almost essentially only vertical. not any of the other access points. Anyway, so with that said, as we've told you a million times before for sure, if you're going to be doing the build process yourself and you're going to be staging your car for paint, you cannot essentially get it ready for paint unless you sand it with the doors on the car. It is essential that the car has a uniform scratch as it lies. In other words, all components in place. If you go to sanding components off the car, oftentimes you'll get a color shift and you won't know it, and the reason is because you sanded the door different than you did a quarter panel. Anyway, with that said, if you have to align your doors, no matter what the car is, and granted our limited ability to adjust is on TI, but if you're going to adjust the doors, remember, take the strikers out. You don't want the strikers to affect how the door lies. They should be the last piece that compensates how the door closes, not how the door sits according to the adjacent panel to it. Now, if you notice this TI, the door with the striker out, the door sags quite a bit right here. To a degree, that's kind of a false indicator. It wasn't that bad. However, the set screws for the up and down action on the TI were kind of chunky, and because I have to adjust all the doors, I took them out, I vapor blasted and cleaned up the threads so they're far more fluid to work with. But anyway, with that said, when I took the striker off, the door did drop a little bit, and the door is lower than the quarter panel. So the striker's out, keeping my hand on the door here to keep the pressure somewhat uniform to the panel. And I'm adjusting my vertical on this upper hinge, and the lower hinge is loose. That way the door has the ability to float up. Now once I have this panel adjusted to this panel, then you put the striker back in, and then you set the depth of the shut. You don't want the door to rise, you don't want it to fall, the hinge keeping it in place. If it doesn't, you need to look at what to do about fixing the hinges, not the striker. Now in this particular case, which you may or may not know, the TIs, the hinges are welded to the door and they're welded to the B pillar or the A pillar. There's essentially no adjustment in them other than vertical, which makes for a very difficult way of making the car look uniform on shut lines. Now right now I'm really good right here, okay, and I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so when the hinge is on, or excuse me, when the latch is on, that door should shut just like that. If not, we have to look at other points. But again, your hinges should have the door resting at the angle that it's supposed to be in the shut position. The latch should only be a device that holds it there, not influencing the depth of the shut nor the height or the pitch angle of the door. Yeah, that's about it right there. Now I'm going to lock them down and moving on to the next problem. Okay, so the door is locked back down like it should be, and the strike plate's back in. The striker, now this is about the point where I have this on, but it's not tight. I don't want it to be committed yet, because I want to get a sense where this is coming in contact with the strike plate. If it comes in too early, it's going to lift the door. If it comes in too late, it won't make the second latching, which is the safety lock. Okay, so that's not too bad. And there's the first lock. Remember, there's 2 clicks. If it's too far in, it won't reach it. But before I do that, I'm going to tighten this down a little bit. And see how it lays with the second latching on. Oh, see, that's way too early. See, I have a lipid, so it's pulled in too much. So, take it back out. Now, because it didn't lift the door or pull the door down, I want it to stay right where it's at. I just want to slide it directly out. Still a little tight. Okay, so right about there. And by the way, these screws that sit in here are fairly soft metal. So it is imperative that you get the screwdriver that you have that fits it exactly. Because if it's too small, you're going to round out the edges, and this will not be easy to adjust later. Pretty good. Pretty good. Need a little more, not much. And if you notice, I wasn't using a ton of force to shut the door. Just enough force to get it to shut, to the second latching, and to compress tightly against the gasket. Once you have it where you think you need it, look on the inside to see if the gasket has a fairly even crush. If it does, feel happy. There we go. Now that is flush all the way down. I don't have a drop right here. Hinge is set right. This is set right. Now that I have one door that is set square on my TI, now it's time to make the front door fit appropriately. Now if you remember, this car was heavily in an accident at some point in time. And the front end was pushed not only up, but away. In other words, it's pushed towards the passenger compartment and back. So, because these doors don't have a whole lot of adjustability in them, the door will have to be reshaped. We got it really close. We got it well within factory tolerance on the measurements. However, I'm not going to go and dismantle every panel to make it perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the door to its finest point and then shape the door edges to match what we have to work with. TIs in the first place didn't have that. One of the essential things that was cool about a Supra is that it had a chrome trim piece that ran across the bottom of the rocker, which meant that you didn't have to be dead perfect because it would hide the irregularities and the gap on the door. So moving on. Okay, so this whole panel is bleeding out far more than it should. I don't want to strike directly at it with a hammer. What I want to do is be able to spread that weight without getting direct blows on top of the panel. So when you use this is basically, it's called the spoon dolly. When you use this and you strike on this, it distributes the weight of the hammer's blows to a wider spread of metal and you don't get the divots. So this area right here is much prouder than that. I don't want to make any more impact on this, so I'm leading this over to the skin instead. And when I start to notice it's coming in contact with that panel, I know I'm really close. Now you have to remember the frame is right about here. It's right here coming up. You can't hit to the inside of the frame. If you do, you're not going to get that dent out. You're going to have to stretch it. There's a whole lot of technique to do that. These doors, the reason we're careful about getting these cars blasted when we do get them blasted is because these doors will cave in relatively easy because there's no reinforcement behind them. So with that said, getting the door to a set position where the gapping is where it needs to be is essential. Once that's done, you're better off trying to float this panel up by getting behind it and driving this down a little bit without making an obvious indent on each panel. Because once this thing's in color, any deviations in the skins will stand out with a high gloss paint because the light bends and you'll see the distortion in the panel and it'll look pretty bad. So anyway, I'm putting this here. Very little of this is on this panel because I don't want to influence this panel. I just want to influence the skin past the frame. Driving on the frame is a futile attempt. Going to the inside of the frame, a lot of damage. So you just want to stay to the leading edge of the frame. Okay, so that's pretty doggone good. So I just need to drive up this style line a little bit because it's a little proud. That's pretty good. All this is squared up, a little high here. I'm happy with that. Now I need to drive this skin down because I want this to match the rocker. If this sits out proud, it stands out. Okay, so this is right where it needs to be. This is a little proud, but this is squared, so I just need to work this without influencing this. Now doing this side of the door is a little trickier because the only thing that's holding it in place is the striker, because that's one point here, the door will want to tend to move in and out like this. So you have to be a little more patient with it. You can't be aggressive with it because you'll end up pushing the striker in and throw the whole door alignment off. Okay, so one of the biggest problems we have with this car right now is that because of the impact that happens at the front end, driving it up over there and driving it down over here, it essentially bent the door frame a little bit, or at least the hinge, to where the door was forward tilted. This has become somewhat of a problem because you have a little bit of door rub that's happening here, and the gapping down here is wide, the gapping right here is wide, the gapping up there is tight, but this gapping is huge. Okay, so it is not only something that is aesthetically obvious, but at the end of the day, it just screams problems. So, because there is no real adjustment in the hinges on these, I have to do something creative. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this. This is called an induction heater. So, if something can be magnetized, it can be heated with this, all right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place this on the upper hinge, and we're gonna heat that up. And what's gonna be nice about this is it's only gonna centralize the heat to the area that is inside the coiling. So I don't have to worry about that heat expanding, burning the paint, creating a lot more havoc than I necessarily want. So what's gonna happen is I'm going to bend that hinge on the top. I'm going to measure it first to get a sense of how far away from it is from the leading edge of the quarter panel. Then we're going to bend it, knowing that the most incremental a bend will exaggerate the overall appearance. Because what happens is, the further you get from the point where you're bending, the more exaggerated the change is. Now the bottom has an appropriate gap. The top is massive. So I need to bend only the top hinge back to tilt the door down a little bit, which will make this gap more appropriate, make this gap more appropriate, and all the way around. So essentially, because you're dealing with a 4-door car, you need to pay attention to 3 sides of the 4 corners. I can't so much worry about this gap completely as much as I need to make sure it's squared here, it's squared here, and squared here. If those 3 sides are squared, and this is still gapped out incorrectly, then I need to look at the back door, because that back door may need to be pitched forward a little bit to close this up. I hope that makes sense. Anyhow, oh, by the way, yes, I have this weird speech impediment now. I have braces, so get used to it for the next year or 2. Anyhow, so we're going to heat that up, we're going to bend that, and then see where our gap is after that. With that said, remember, if you're going to make changes to the hinges, get rid of the striker so the striker doesn't influence how the door lays. We'll have to repeat that same process on the rear as well. So let's get started. Okay, so now that we've heated up that hinge and made the adjustments, we only moved it 2 millimeters. The gap that was up here was excessive. I would say, I didn't measure it, but had I measured it, it would have been at least 7, 8 millimeters of gap, okay? Now we have to keep in mind, these 4-door cars, for the most part, this wasn't a very tight gap in the first place. The reason being is when it opened, it needed pitch in angle. In other words, this door needed to be able to open and go inside of this door. All right. Okay, that's actually pretty damn good. This is effectively half of what it was. And it's about right for a Super or TI. I'm really pleased with that. Now, the other thing we have to do is all these angles are correct. This angle is ever so slightly pitched open wider here than it is here. So the next thing I have to do is take the striker out of that, adjust this door leading forward a little bit. I don't want to heat the hinge if I don't have to. Oftentimes, just by raising the door angle, without the striker influencing, raising the door angle will close this gap enough. So I'm going to get started with that. Okay, so now that I've adjusted that door, this gap is tightened even better. The striker's back in. It doesn't influence how the door shuts. My rise and fall here is exactly where it should be. This is my next clearance concern, which is plenty. And that's the other thing you have to kind of pay attention to, because when you are going to paint a car, you're putting millage on here. So if this is really tight, by the time you put paint on it, it may be too tight, you may chip. So you have to keep those things in consideration when you're doing this. But overall, other than bringing that striker out a little bit, this setup is about as perfect as it's ever going to get. I'm okay with it.